Thank you so much. Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, the Top 10 Tips for ICD-10. Today you're going to learn tips to help you manage the changes that have the greatest impact to ICD-10-CM for 2017. So let's get started. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to go over the top things that have the most impact on your practice and what you can do in order to ensure that you're going to be submitting clean claims out that door the first time. As you all know, October 1st is right around the door. We're going to learn today how we can obtain clarifications on the coding guideline changes for the fiscal year 2017. We'll obtain insights on laterality for retinopathy, diabetic neuropathy. We'll have an understanding of post-op seroma. We'll know the changes that impact our excludes 1 and excludes 2 notes, how to properly report atypical fractures, the changes that impact the injuries and injury reporting, and the differences among hypertensive urgency, emergency, and crisis, along with the updates to the conductive hearing loss, and how you can utilize expert tools to accurately select codes necessary for compliance while avoiding any denials. As we know, coding guideline changes, there have been updates to our tabular alphabetic index, the neoplasm table, the table of drugs and chemicals, and the index of external causes. We know that annually we have new codes added, revised, and deleted. With this being the first year of the federally mandated use of this new code set, since the freeze will be taken off, we now have to report on that higher level of specificity. CMS is no longer going to accept just our general codes out there. We want to avoid all of those unspecified and make sure that we've reviewed all of our latest changes that have been made and also will take place effective October 1st. So we've got a lot more specificity. We've got laterality added in. We've got a ton of new codes, over 1,900 different codes that were added, and I'm sure everyone by now at this point is prepared and is just kind of counting down the clock to make sure their practice is ready. So we're going to go over the top things that if this impacts you, you'll know that you want to touch on this. We want to update our encounter forms, our billing sheets if we're still utilizing all of that, making sure that our EMRs have had all of the updates applied to them, just so that when our providers are going in or the coders are going in to select those diagnoses codes based off what happened during that encounter, that they're able to actually have the option for those new codes. So that's a big thing to remember. As you can see here on this slide, one of the biggest impacts compared to fiscal year 2016 versus 2017 is that we've got a lot of guideline changes. So there's going to be different guideline changes, and if you actually pull up these guidelines that are available on the CMS website, you'll see that there is a variety of options and changes, and they are emphasized by bold, italics, and underlined sections. So as you can see here, within the official guidelines for fiscal year 2017, that changes have been made, which are emphasized in italics at the bottom of this image, that indicate that this is a new revision to the heading. So there's changes made to the heading for C-section IC2, general guidelines, and C-section IC19, adverse effects for the poisoning, underdosing, and toxic effects. And I just wanted to incorporate this in here because we all know that we've reviewed the guidelines for 2016, but I want to make sure that we are aware of all the, at least the most important changes that may have an impact on how you do your coding, how the providers do their coding and documentation, and where these changes are going to hit. So this is literally just pulled from the guidelines itself, and I want to emphasize where these changes are and what they are. On this slide here, you can see that within the official guidelines for fiscal year 2017, that the changes have been made, which are emphasized in bold. So at the bottom of this, all of the information in bold at the bottom of the image indicates that narrative changes have been made within the section of the guidelines. So as you can see, we have new information added to reflect coding related to laterality and whether or not the condition is bilateral and being treated during the same encounter. One would assign the bilateral code for any condition existing on both sides, so both our right and our left sides. Once one side is treated and resolved previously, and that condition no longer exists, then one would assign the proper unilateral code for the side in which the condition is still present. So I went in for bilateral eye pain. My right eye is okay, but my left eye is not. On my subsequent visit, we want to make sure that we are reporting the appropriate unilateral code as long as the patient no longer has those bilateral systems in that subsequent encounter. However, if the patient is treated, but the symptoms are still not 100% completely resolved, then it's still appropriate to go ahead and report that bilateral code. But this is a change. Again, it's emphasized in bold at the bottom. This is section 13, straight out of the CMS guidelines. As you can see, it's page 16 of 114. And the bold indicates all of the changes, and making sure that versus our initial and subsequent visits, that we are ensuring that the treatment that was performed affects the bilateral. When one condition is still present or both are still present, just being able to report on either that bilateral versus unilateral, and then again assigning the appropriate code if it is unilateral, ensuring that if there is a right-sided code versus left-sided code, that we're able to select that. So again, basically the point of this is that it's still appropriate to report bilateral as long as there is still an issue with both sides. I think that's the biggest change that we can take away from this. Another big thing is within our section of Chapter 7, for those of you who this is your specialty or you see this on a regular basis. This has lots of changes within Chapter 7, H00 through H59. We've got a ton of different codes that were added to go into that laterality aspect. So previously we didn't have, right, left, bilateral, unspecified, and now we do. So we've got diabetic retinopathy codes that further add to our expansion. We have codes that go into our macular edema involvement, again, our laterality as to what sides, and this is all going to have an effect on your claims. It impacts, how your providers document. So if you're getting an unspecified code, we're going to have to go back and query that provider to make sure that we have something specific. If the provider cannot provide that or there is not a definitive diagnosis present, then there are exceptions around where unspecified codes are still allowed. However, that is dependent upon the documentation and the presenting problem. So we want to make sure that our providers are aware of this, because there are so many new codes added here that, again, make sure EMRs are updated, the providers are aware, your encounter forms and your sheets that you utilize for billing purposes, if you're still doing that, we want to make sure they're all updated to reflect this, because we don't want to have the ability for the provider to only select unspecified when we know that there's actually a million more codes that I'm sorry, not a million. There are lots more codes that have been added in for the provider to select from in order to gain that additional level of specificity and choose the proper code. So just something to think about and be aware of. It's a large area.